Hey folks, this is the second week of our discussion series on a public history of the Constitution, or a people's history of the Constitution. So last week we looked at the mythology that surrounds the document itself, how it's taught, how it's framed, who it's really for today, and how our historical imaginative about it, all of the different ways in which we gain impressions about the Constitution are formed. And that's where public history starts. But before we even touch the document itself, we need to ask another set of questions into where we begin. We've got to go back to 1786 and ask the question most textbooks, most civic classes, most of the YouTube videos and other kinds of posts on this awful just skip. Because we need to take it seriously, how did we even get to a convention in Philadelphia? Because the version you probably heard goes something like this. I'm not going to set it to music. The Articles of Confederation were too weak. Shays Rebellion proved that people couldn't govern themselves. The whole country was about to fall apart in violence and licentiousness. So the brilliant framers fixed it by writing a new constitution that protected our rights in innovative ways that had never been considered by people before. Problem solved, done and dusted. But that version isn't just wrong. It's propaganda. The miracle in Philadelphia. That Philadelphia Convention didn't begin with principle. It began with panic. But panic by a couple of elite people. The Articles of Confederation were not broken. They were doing what the revolutionaries intended for them to do. Limit centralized power. Leave most of the power at the state level, these new independent republics. But that was exactly the problem for men like Alexander Hamilton and James Madison and Gouverneur Morris and Rufus King. The first Rufus King, not the later Rufus King. PhD Rachel will tell you more. They didn't want to preserve the American Revolution. They wanted to contain it. And we'll also talk about why their ages, those four were in their early to mid-30s, mattered. And not in the way that some pretty empty social media posts like to claim. Oh my gosh, they were so young. Yes, so young to be so wrong. Madison was the oldest at 36. Hamilton was 30. Anyway, we'll get into that. They staged a pretext at Annapolis in a dry run that only attracted 5 states. Why? Because people didn't see there as being a problem. But then, when angry veterans of the Revolutionary War, farmers crushed by debt and taxes, rose up in western Massachusetts in a resistance, not a rebellion, not an insurrection, they got their excuse. Shays, not really a rebellion, terrified the elites. Not because it was radical, but because it was democratic. John Adams called it terrorism. That's when George Washington, also freaked out about Shays, stepped in. Not to support the people, no man of the people, George Washington, but to keep them in line. Big fan of that. We'll talk later about his executions during the Revolutionary War. He agreed to preside over a new convention in Philadelphia to give it a kind of false legitimacy. Without him, because he was the single most influential person in all of the states at the time. None of the other states would have bothered to show up. Virginia certainly wouldn't have bothered. It would have been Annapolis all over again because no one else really saw the need or bought into the fear that Hamilton and others were trying to spread. But even then, the convention had no mandate to write a new constitution. Rhode Island didn't even bother to send delegates. The Confederation Congress had only authorized a revision of the Articles of Confederation. But from the first day, the goals of the nationalists was clear. Scrap the Articles. Replace them entirely with something that centralized power. That removed it from the states and consolidated it at a federal level. The Constitution wasn't written to complete the American Revolution. It was written to stop it from going any further. So this week, we're going to break down the road to Philadelphia. Who was behind it, what they were really afraid of, and why the founding myth, the patriot myth, still protects their legacy today. So join us on Patreon, join us here in the comments, and tomorrow live on YouTube. This is a public history of the Constitution.